Greetings. My name is Casey Luskin, and I'm here on behalf of Discovery Institute, representing our nearly 1,000 supporters and friends in Texas, as well as more than 2,000 Texans who have signed our academic freedom petition calling for the right of teachers and students to discuss both the scientific strengths and weaknesses of evolution. I personally hold graduate degrees in both science and law and have studied evolutionary biology extensively at the undergraduate and graduate levels. And I also work with teachers on the national level on this issue. Discovery Institute is a nonpartisan nonprofit research center for public policy with nearly 40 affiliated PhD fellows representing such disciplines as molecular and cell biology, microbiology, and biochemistry. 7 of our fellows reside in Texas. Several prior speakers, not necessarily today, but at other meetings of this board, have inaccurately discussed our organization, and so I appreciate the opportunity to correct the record with some of you today. Contrary to claims that you may have heard, we do not support the teaching of creationism, nor do we favor putting intelligent design, which is different from creationism, into the Texas science standards. We made this position clear in 2003. What we do favor is an honest discussion of all the scientific evidence relating to neo-Darwinian evolutionary theory. At the January board meeting, you heard from experts both for and against the strengths and weaknesses language. And today, I'm presenting you with a number of handouts, 2 of which are scientific rebuttals to many of the inaccurate and one-sided claims made by Professors Ronald Wetherington and David Hillis. For example, Professor Wetherington dramatically stated regarding the fossil record of human origins that there are, quote, no gaps, no lack of transitional fossils, unquote. But in 2004, leading evolutionary biologist Ernst Mayr stated in his book, What Makes Biology Unique, that the earliest fossils of our genus Homo are, quote, separated from Australopithecus by a large unbridged gap, unquote, where we are, quote, not having any fossils that can serve as a missing link, unquote. David Hillis' testimony had even more errors and misrepresentations. Hillis called himself a tree of life expert, yet he failed to acknowledge scientific challenges to Darwin's tree of life and misrepresented scientific disagreements in this field. In fact, the very same day that Dr. Hillis told you, the board, that within evolutionary phylogenies there is, quote, overwhelming agreement correspondence as you go from protein to protein, DNA sequence to DNA sequence, unquote, the scientific journal New Scientist published an article titled, Why Darwin Was Wrong About the Tree of Life. And this article stated that, quote, the problem was that different genes told contradictory evolutionary stories, unquote, leading one researcher to state that regarding the relationships of higher organisms that, quote, we've just annihilated the tree of life, unquote. More documentation of their errors and overstatements are found in the documents I'm distributing. Finally, I'd also like to distribute to the board a rebuttal from Dr. Ralph Silke to Dr. Hillis's inaccurate statements about Dr. Silke's research into bacterial evolution. As you can see in Dr. Silke's response, Dr. Hillis's citation of research dealt with an entirely different question than what Dr. Silke has investigated. So in conclusion, the board has heard an extremely one-sided and inaccurate discussion from some of the pro-evolution lobby experts, but that's what this is all about, isn't it? It's about accuracy and avoiding a one-sided discussion. There are legitimate scientific weaknesses in evolution and legitimate scientific debates here, and thus on behalf of the many other Texas-based supporters of Discovery Institute, I urge you to make students aware of these scientific debates. Thank you.
I just had a question for you because it seems that you work with teachers nationally across the country. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, and you've looked at other state science standards. What happens when they don't require that critical thinking on evolution? What has happened in other states? I'm just curious.
Well, I would say that the idea that if you don't require critical analysis of evolution, that there will still be critical analysis of evolution in the classroom is largely a myth. Most teachers teach to the standards, and their administrators require them to teach to the standards. And if you don't put into the standards some requirement to actually require critical thinking on the topic of evolution, then there is a very, very low chance it's going to happen in the classroom. And for those teachers that do possibly discuss critical analysis of evolution, or they teach students about both sides of the issue, what will happen is administrators who don't like what's going on will use the fact that it's not in the standards as sort of a hammer to try to prevent them from doing that. And they'll say, well, it's not in the standards, and we teach to the standards, and that's all we do here, and so you're not going to be allowed to do this. I mean, we all know this is a very controversial topic, and that, rightly so, administrators are very careful in how it's approached. So unless you have this kind of language directly in the standards, teachers not only will likely not even discuss any of the strengths and weaknesses of evolution, but if they do, there's a very high chance that administrators who want to stop them from doing that will take such actions and will prevent them from doing that. At least that's been my experience with teachers in a number of different states who have experienced this sort of thing.
Mr. Craig.
Are you saying that
analyze and evaluate, that you don't like that language, or?
Oh, I think the analyze and evaluate language is great, and I would certainly support that. Matter of fact, it's very amusing to me that some of the evolution lobbyists who previously said they wanted to analyze and evaluate language now don't like the fact that it's being directly applied to evolution. And that is interesting to me, and I think that the standard that requires analyzing and evaluating evolution is excellent. And given that it's all that language to analyze and evaluate is found already throughout your entire high school science standards, it seems to me completely appropriate and nothing wrong with applying it specifically to evolution.
And do you know of any other state that has strengths and weaknesses?
The specific language, strengths, and weaknesses is not, to my knowledge, in any other state other than Texas right now. However, there are about 6 states that do actually require teachers to talk about the scientific evidence for and against evolution using similar language to what is actually in the proposed draft that's on the table right now that doesn't have the strengths and weaknesses language, but does require teachers to teach some of the evidence for and against common descent. And some of those states include South Carolina, Minnesota, New Mexico, Alabama, Pennsylvania, and Missouri. And so there are actually states right now that do require teachers to teach about some of the evidence for and against evolution. And whether you use the exact strengths and weaknesses language or use the analyze and evaluate language, this is a good policy, and it's a great way to teach this subject so that students can learn about evolution most effectively.
Mr. Luskin, in light of the fact that we've heard testimony that from several people who've said analyze and evaluate should include looking at evidence that's supportive and non-supportive, but then a lot of people say that that's not good language and that analyze and evaluate is a higher level and that we can't include that, but then they've also said they don't have time to look at the weaknesses, and maybe that's because science doesn't put an emphasis on looking at the weaknesses, only the strengths. Do you think that it is necessary to include some kind of defining language as to what evaluate means so that the teachers and the publishers have a directive that it's not to be a one-sided argument?
Well, I think the more guidance you can give to teachers, the better. I mean, that's always the case. And with teachers I work with in many different states, they want as much guidance as you can give them. I think the idea that we can't, that we don't have time to discuss the weaknesses in evolution is a total fallacy. I mean, I've helped many teachers around the country develop evolution curricula when they want to discuss the weaknesses. And you can spend a week and a half or 2 weeks on the evidence supporting evolution, which is what's in the textbooks right in most states right now. And really you can discuss some critical thinking exercises where some of the counter evidence is raised in 1, maybe just 2 days. And this actually, in their experience, from what they tell me, it really adds to the students' understanding of the evidence for evolution by actually teaching them also some of the evidence that counters evolution. It helps them to understand the entire subject better. So if your goal is to help students understand and even accept evolution, teach them the weaknesses. I think it's the most effective way to teach any scientific subject.